So we've all been raised differently, and as couples, when it comes to estate planning, we can have very different perspectives. And these different perspectives can really get in the way of our starting or finishing our estate planning together. So in this video, I want to talk about these different perspectives and how we can overcome them to get consensus as a couple about your estate planning and your financial path forward for the future. So I think it's important to understand your relationship with money. And I recently learned that there's a term for this. It's called your money story or your money script. So this could be the impact that your childhood has had on your core memories of money. And it can influence your financial decision making in ways that maybe you don't even recognize. So I have a couple of personal examples. Growing up, I was very close to my grandpa, and he would always say, Ellen, don't worry about money, you'll have plenty, you're all good. So you'd think, oh, that would be reassuring. But that actually created a lot of anxiety with me about money because we never really talked about money. We didn't balance checkbooks together. I didn't really know how to deal with money. So I would rather ignore it than really work on my money and my money story. So I've really had to overcome a lot in order to say, run a business, have a successful home, get along well with my husband, those sorts of things. So another example is I remember going out to dinner with my now husband, Scott, and we were dating, and we went out to a restaurant and he ordered his own meal. And you might think, well, of course, everybody orders their own meal. But in my family, we all talked about what we were going to order, and then we all shared our meals, like kind of family style. This is just what we did. And by the way, Grandpa was usually paying, and he didn't think we should get appetizers or drinks. So nobody ordered appetizers or drinks, and we all ordered things that everybody could eat. And that's just the way it was. Now, keep in mind in Scott's family, that's not the way it was, right? Everybody kind of ordered their own meal and ate their own meal. So Scott was really surprised when I was shocked that he was getting his own thing without consulting with me first. So we kind of had to work that out, right? So now he orders his own thing because that's what he wants to do. And when I'm going out to dinner with girlfriends, I'll go out and we'll share our food because I still enjoy that approach. But there are different things from the way that you were raised and how you approach sharing or not sharing. Now keep in mind, I'm not a therapist. These are things that I've had to work through myself, and I've also seen my clients needing to work through, especially my clients who are married. Okay, so the first way that you need to reach consensus is to understand what do you need to reach consensus on. Okay, with estate planning, if some asset is your separate property, you get to decide yourself what happens with your separate property. Your spouse doesn't get any say in that. Okay, so you get to decide that. But if it's community property, then really the two of you need to decide together where things are going to go, because basically you co-own that. Even if somebody has earned the money themselves, like in my family, I'm the primary breadwinner and my husband's home with the kids, and we're all very happy with that. But anything that I earn is our community property because my husband is really contributing to our family in different ways. So we would have to decide together where are our assets going to go when we die. So there's certain things that can kind of get in the way of consensus. One of them is, what if you have different children? There's a lot of blended families out there, blended marriages. You bring in your own kids into a marriage. That's great. But you might have different perspectives of what each child needs for the future. Or maybe you have some kids who are already older and they've already left the nest and they're supporting themselves, and you feel like you don't need to provide as much for them. Whereas you have children who are at home who are still growing up, and they need a lot more to put them through college and for their support. Or maybe you have a child with special needs who's going to need support for the rest of their lives. So I think in these situations, it's actually really helpful to do what we call financial projections. You can look to see, okay, how much do we anticipate each child might need? For a child with special needs, how much do they need for the rest of their lives if they're not able to work? For a child who's neurotypical, maybe how much do we need to support them up until age, say 25 or 30, when they can really start taking over? The more facts and information you can get into the conversation, the better, I think. I have a video called Estate Planning for Blended Families, where I do bring up a lot of the planning options that you might choose. Also, if you're a blended family, what's called an A-B split might work well for you. So what happens is the first person to die, their money goes into an irrevocable trust that ultimately gets distributed where that person decides they want it to go. So the spouse, when the first person dies, it goes into the irrevocable trust. And during the spouse's lifetime, the spouse gets all the income. So they're supported by this trust. But when the spouse dies, that's when the assets, that half of the community property that goes into this B trust goes out to the kids who the original spouse who died first wants it to go. So that's one way of, even if you're in a community property regime and you have different kids, you can choose where your half goes when both of you are gone. Now, I do have a video on AB splits. These are revocable living trusts that split at the first death. It's called What is an AB Split? Very creative name. So you can take a look at that one.
Hey everyone! If you like my mom's video, like and subscribe.
Now, another bone of contention might be your comfort level or your anxiety level, especially when you have kids who haven't yet launched. I know there's some families that I've seen where one of the spouses is really worried about making sure that one of their children who hasn't launched is being provided for. They want to make sure that that child gets some money regardless. And one thing you can do in your revocable trust is you can say, upon the first death, whether husband dies first or the wife dies first, or one spouse or another spouse, you can say, upon the first death, this amount of money goes into the child's special needs trust. So we know, even if the other spouse remarries and leaves all their money not to the special needs child, the special needs child is still going to get a certain amount of money upon the first death. Timing-wise, that can be very reassuring. You can also do that with life insurance. You can say, upon my death, this policy is not going to go to my spouse. It's going to go to the special needs trust for my disabled child. So that can help alleviate some of that anxiety to know that immediately upon the spouse's death, things will be funded into the special needs trust, and you'll make sure that that money's there for the child for the rest of their life. Okay, so as a couple, you might have different goals or different causes that are near and dear to your heart. I know my aunt has many cats. Sometimes I lose track. I can't count how many there are, but boy, she loves the ASPCA. You might have one spouse who's really an animal lover, and then another spouse who says, well, no, I want to leave our money to my alma mater, or, to such and such university or such and such cause. And you can do both. You can say, on the first death, everything goes to the surviving spouse, but then on the second death, everything splits equally, half of it to where spouse one says, and then half of it to where spouse two says. So you really can accommodate, your wishes for your goals and how you want to make a difference even when you're gone. So then another point of contention could be if you come into the marriage and you have different asset levels. One spouse might have a lot more money coming into the marriage than the other spouse. How do we equalize this out? How do we make it fair? How do we make sure that the spouse with less money is taken care of, but the spouse with more money doesn't have to give up all their money to the other spouse? Well, I've seen some situations where the couple decides to segregate a certain amount of money and make that their community property. So let's say spouse one has a $10 million estate, and they'll take $2 million of that and buy a family home, a residence. And, both spouses live there, they enjoy the house, and upon the first death, everything goes to the surviving spouse. So that can be a good way to provide for the spouse that didn't bring as much money in. The other $8 million that the person had who brought more money into the marriage, they get to keep that as their separate property. Now, you'd want to work with family law attorney, and everybody needs to have their own attorney when you're doing this transmutation of assets from separate property to community property. But it still can be done, and that can provide the surviving spouse with some comfort to know, hey, at least I know that this house is going to be there for me, and maybe some cash. If my spouse dies before me, he or she wants to leave most of their money to their own causes. So that can be a good way to take care of somebody. Now, one other thing that I often see is that you have couples who have different approaches to managing money. One spouse who really likes investing aggressively in the stock market, and another spouse who's a bit more hesitant. They want to just have their money in bonds. Now, we don't do financial planning, but this comes up a lot. Let's say if somebody has a retirement account and They're trying to decide which level of investing do they want. Do they want to be more aggressive or more conservative? And they're talking with their spouse, and it's hard to come up with an answer. So if you have a financial advisor that you trust and can help you with this, I suggest that you talk with them about this. Maybe you can find a good middle ground. And also, if you're like me and you grew up and people didn't really talk to you about money, and maybe you're just delegating all of the money management to your spouse, that may not be the best position to be in. I'd encourage you to do more reading about investments, about budgeting. Learn for yourself, because if something happens to your spouse, if they die, if they become sick, if they leave you, God forbid, then you're going to have to really get up to speed. I've found personally that the more I've learned, the more comfortable I've become with money, with managing money, and it's really helped my husband and I to get on the same page with our planning. So that's a lot to consider when it comes to getting on the same page for estate planning. I recommend that you not only work with a financial advisor that you feel comfortable with, but also an estate planner who you feel comfortable with. I often say that I feel like my work, I do the legal stuff, but I'm also a counselor and I'm also a social worker. I help people kind of work through these difficult conversations. So don't let that get you stuck in the middle of something. Work with your estate planning attorney. Talk with them about what's keeping you from taking the next step to get your estate plan completed, and then you can sleep well at night.
Hello everyone. If you liked my mom's video, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you all next time.